Now, in the second lesson, we ended with the question, does knowing the inspiration help the acquisition? And in this lesson, we will answer this question as well as a little bit more. So, first off, the short answer is yes, very much so, if used the right way. So, let's have a look at it. Beginning with predictive patterns. You see, Tolkien didn't invent ad hoc quirks. He modeled Sindarin's chronology and historical changes on real processes. The rise of medieval Welsh from Common Celtic plus familiar Indo-European effects like ear affection. That means, once you learn a handful of regular patterns, initial consonant mutation, ear affection, common plural classes, common compounding or place-forming elements, you can kinda predict forms you haven't memorized yet. And by the way, never memorize those patterns. Anyway, this turns memorization into pattern matching, which is why you should not memorize them, but rather understand them. Next, we have perceptual tuning. If you study, or at least listen to Welsh, or read reconstructions of its phonology, your ear will recognize Sindarin's characteristic sounds, the consonant clusters, the lineated variants, the cadence. So production, listening, comprehension are easier. If you need them, that is. Tolkien intentionally gave Sindarin a Welsh-like surface. And third, diachronic thinking, meaning fewer exceptions. Tolkien's languages behave like real languages with history. Learning the historical causes, for example, a lost final E, once caused vowel raising in the stem, lets you understand why irregularities exist rather than treat them as random. And all of this reduces cognitive load when encountering apparent irregularity. You can reconstruct why it is that way and not just memorize. Again, understanding goes over memorization. But now to the question, how does it help? So, treat the Welsh analogy as a map, not a rulebook. Here we have a few points to go through. First, learn the mutation table first. Mutations are everywhere in Sindarin, often certain prepositions, possessives, articles, and compounds. Here we could theoretically make a two-column chart. Unmutated to soft to nasal to aspirate, and 12 minimal pairs. For example, P to B or V or V is applicable. Then we could practice producing short phrases where mutation triggers appear. For example, after E or V articles, prepositions like un, possessive constructions. This already yields huge gains in comprehension and production. Next we have master the E affection, aka vowel alternations. Here, identify common vowel alternations used for plurals and derivation. For example, R to E or O to EO, and so on. Here, we could make a list of stems with their mutated forms. For example, Adan, which means man in the singular, to Edain, which means man in the plural, as one of the most popular example. Once you spot the pattern, you will form and recognize plurals immediately. And then, we could compile a high-frequency root list. Here, you could memorize round about 50 highly productive roots, such as stone, king, tree, light, sea, fire, lord, maiden, friend, house, and so on. And again, when I say memorize, it does not mean you should learn it by heart, but rather to assimilate to understand, much like you would do with normal vocabulary acquisition. You see, many names and toponyms are compounds of these. For example, Gond means stone plus Dor, or Dor means land. And thus we have Gondor, the land of stone, or stone land. And this is a practical and a rather quick vocabulary expansion. So, rather than memorizing by heart, you should memorize by assimilating and understanding. Next we have a simple practice with compounding templates. Here, for example, learn 6 to 8 compounding patterns. For example, a root plus another root, or a root plus door, as we already have learned, that means land. Or we could have root plus when, or riel, or simply root plus rods. So we would have a compound out of one root word plus another attachment, and thus making even more new words with them. So you see, compounding is a massive productivity lever in tokens lexicon, or in languages in general. And lastly, we could use minimal historical sketches for irregular items. When you see an unexpected form, try to explain it historically. For example, vowel loss, palatalization, past suffix loss, rather than memorize blind. This reduces the number of those stubborn exceptions. But here a word of warning. First of all, don't conflate Welsh meaning Sindarin exactly, because Tolkien modeled the character of Sindarin on Welsh. He did not copy Welsh grammar word for word, so expect similar yet not identical mechanisms. Basically, treat Welsh as inspirational training wheels, not an answer key. And second, unfortunately, we do have source fragmentarity, which means Tolkien's corpus is, unsurprisingly, incomplete, and sometimes even internally inconsistent. You see, much of Sindarin grammar used by us learners is reconstructed by scholars or fans, so we have always to be a little bit careful, and certainly have to get rid of the mindset that we could speak Sindarin or any other Tolkien languages fluently. So, now to the final conclusion. Yes, knowing the inspirations will convert raw list learning into rule learning. There you have it. It sounds more complicated than it is, but don't worry, we will go through this step by step, as much as the resources allowing that. Now, are there any affixations we could use to expand vocabulary quickly? The answer is, yet again, yes. You see, Tolkien Sindarin shows several reliable word-building strategies we can exploit for fast, principled vocabulary growth. So, let's have a look at them. Now, starting with the first one we have already encountered, compounding, which by the way is the single most productive device we have here. A quick reminder what it is. We are joining two roots or elements to make a new noun or name. So we have root 1 plus root 2 equals a compound. And you may wonder, why is there such a high gain? Well, you only need to know a few hundred roots to produce thousands of plausible compounds. A trick that works with many other languages as well. So, let's have a look at 3 examples. The first one we already know, Gondor, meaning stone land, consisting out of Gond, which means stone, plus Dor, which means lands. Next, we have the wonderful name Galadriel. Here we have Galad, which means radiance, plus Riel, which means garlanded maiden. And thirdly, we have many royal names, such as Arnor, which kinda consists out of Aran, which means king, plus a second root, Since we are on the topic anyway, let's look at some more name-forming suffixes. So, first, what do they do? Well, add a final element to make a personal name with a predictable meaning. For example, Wen or Quen, which means maiden or girl. Here we have Arwen, which means noble maiden. Then we have, as already discussed, Riel or Iel, which again means garlanded maiden or crowned maiden. Here again we have Galadriel. Then we have Rod, which we have in names such as Angrod or Finrod. This element is related to Raud, which means noble. And that's it. Then we have locative or place of fixation. Again, for example, Dor, meaning land or realm. Here again, Gondor. And then we have derivation via vowel mutation and ear affixation, basically internal morphology. So, instead of a suffix, Sindarin often uses vowel change, historically triggered by a lost e or final vowel, to form plurals or related words. This is not a suffix, but it still is very productive for recognizing or creating forms. Here we have already seen an example, Adan to Edain, man in the singular to man in the plural. And then we have affixation for grammatical endings, basically less for vocabulary growth and more for morphology. You see, we have possessive suffixes, n, m, and so on, and pronoun combinations are productive and useful for phrase formation. For example, lam, meaning tongue, and lamen, meaning my tongue. These are morphological rather than derivational, but knowing them allows you to produce many meaningful phrases from just a few roots.